photograph captured what appeared to be a moment of childhood joy. A young girl, perhaps 8 years old, sat in a wooden chair holding an elaborate porcelain doll, her face showing what looked like a smile. The image, dated 1911, had been discovered at an antique shop in Charleston, South Carolina, in March 2024. The frame was ornate but damaged, the glass cracked, the photograph itself severely faded and water-stained. Photo conservator Lisa Wang purchased it for $5, intrigued by the quality of the original photography. When she began the meticulous restoration process, carefully removing decades of damage and enhancing faded details, she discovered something that transformed this apparent portrait of happiness into evidence of profound grief. The doll wasn't a toy. It was a memorial. The following story is a work of realistic fiction, inspired by true historical contexts regarding Victorian and Edwardian mourning practices, post-mortem photography, memorial dolls, childhood mortality, and grief rituals. Lisa Wang had restored Victorian and Edwardian photographs for 15 years. She'd seen thousands of portraits from the era, formal family groups, stern-faced ancestors, elaborately dressed children posing with treasured possessions. This photograph seemed to fit the pattern. A well-dressed child with an expensive doll, taken in what appeared to be a professional studio with painted backdrop. But something felt wrong from the moment Lisa began examining it under magnification. The girl's expression wasn't quite right. What appeared to be a smile at normal viewing distance resolved, under magnification, into something more complex. Her mouth was turned up at the corners. Yes, but mechanically, artificially. Her eyes held no corresponding joy. They were flat, distant, almost dissociated. And the doll, as Lisa cleaned the image and began digital enhancement, details emerged that disturbed her. The doll was extraordinarily elaborate. Porcelain face, human hair wig, glass eyes, silk dress with hand-sewn details. But it wasn't positioned like a toy. The girl wasn't playing with it. She was holding it the way you'd hold something precious and fragile, or the way you'd hold something you were afraid to lose. Lisa worked systematically through the restoration. The photograph had suffered severe water damage across the bottom third, obscuring the girl's lap and the lower portion of the doll. Brown stains bloomed across the right side. The emulsion had degraded in patches, creating areas of complete detail loss. But Lisa had seen worse. She started with the background. The painted backdrop showed a garden scene, typical for studio portraits of the era. The chair was simple wood, possibly the photographer's prop. The lighting was professional, carefully arranged to illuminate the subject evenly. Then she moved to the girl herself. As the enhancement revealed clearer details, Lisa noticed the clothing. The girl wore all black. A black dress with a high collar, black stockings, black shoes. In 1911, that meant mourning dress. Victorian and Edwardian mourning protocols were strict. All black for deepest mourning, gradually lightening over prescribed periods. This child was in full mourning. Lisa felt her stomach tighten. A child in mourning dress. But mourning whom? She enhanced the girl's face further. The forced smile became more apparent, but more disturbing were the signs of recent crying. Puffy eyelids, redness around the eyes still visible despite the photograph's age. This picture had been taken shortly after intense grief. Then Lisa reached the most damaged section, the water-stained area showing the doll. As she painstakingly reconstructed the details, pixel by pixel, something emerged that made her breath catch. The doll wasn't dressed in play clothes. It wore a white gown, elaborate, lacy, with careful details, a christening gown or burial gown. And on the doll's porcelain face, as Lisa increased the resolution and contrast, she could see something painted or written. Text. Small, precise lettering across the doll's forehead. Lisa zoomed in until the letters resolved. Baby Margaret. Born March 3, 1910. Called to heaven April 2, 1911. Age 13 months. This wasn't a toy doll. This was a memorial doll, a custom-made replica created to commemorate a dead child. And the girl in the photograph, dressed in mourning black with her forced smile and empty eyes, was holding her dead baby sister. Lisa immediately contacted Dr. Rebecca Moore, a historian specializing in Victorian death customs and mourning practices. She sent images of the restored photograph and explained what she'd found. Dr. Moore called within hours. This is an extraordinary example of memorial doll photography. These were more common than people realize, but few photographs have survived, and even fewer have been properly documented. Memorial dolls? Lisa asked. I've heard of post-mortem photography, but not dolls. Post-mortem photography documented the deceased directly. Photographs of the dead, often posed to look sleeping, or in the case of infants, held by living family members. But memorial dolls served a different purpose. When a child died, especially an infant, some families would commission a doll made to represent the lost child. Correct hair color, glass eyes matching the child's eyes, clothing identical to burial garments. The doll became a tangible memorial, something surviving children could hold when photographs alone weren't enough. Dr. Moore explained the practice. In the late Victorian and Edwardian eras, childhood mortality was devastatingly high. Families, especially middle and upper-class families with resources, developed elaborate grief rituals. Professional mourning protocols dictated clothing, behavior, and social restrictions for prescribed periods. And for bereaved siblings, especially young children who couldn't understand why a brother or sister had suddenly vanished, memorial dolls provided a physical object for their grief. The photograph you've found shows a secondary ritual, Dr. Moore continued. After the memorial doll was created, families would sometimes have it photographed with surviving children. It documented the family's grief, yes, but it also served a purpose for the surviving child. It made the loss tangible, gave them a sibling they could hold, and created a permanent record that the lost child had existed. Lisa looked at the photograph again. The girl's expression made terrible sense now. She'd been told to smile for the camera. Children were always instructed to maintain composure in formal portraits. But she was holding a representation of her dead baby sister. The conflict between expected behavior and genuine grief was written across her face. What about the text on the doll's forehead? Lisa asked. That was standard for memorial dolls. The doll's face would be inscribed with the child's name, birth date, death date, and sometimes a religious phrase. It transformed the doll from toy to memorial object. Anyone seeing it would immediately understand its purpose. Lisa found more evidence as she continued enhancing the photograph. The girl's hands, holding the doll, showed tension. White knuckles, rigid fingers. She wasn't cradling it gently like a toy. She was gripping it like she was afraid someone would take it away. And behind the girl, barely visible in the enhanced image, Lisa found something she'd initially thought was backdrop damage. A second figure, standing in shadow. An adult woman, dressed in black, positioned just outside the main composition. The mother, Lisa realized, standing watch while her surviving daughter was photographed with the memorial of her dead child. This wasn't just a photograph, Dr. Moore said. This was a grief ritual being documented. The mother ensured the memorial was preserved. The sister was given a tangible object for her loss. And the family created proof that baby Margaret had existed and been loved. But Lisa had found something else. something that made this tragedy even more heartbreaking. Lisa continued her deep enhancement of the photograph, examining every detail at maximum magnification. As she worked on the girl's face, trying to improve the clarity of features damaged by time, she noticed something that stopped her cold. The girl's eyes weren't just sad. They showed something more specific. Lisa had seen enough photographs of traumatized children in historical archives and documentary collections to recognize the look. This wasn't simple grief. This was guilt. She searched for more context. The photographer's mark was visible on the original mounting board. Stillwell Studio, Charleston, SC 1911. Lisa contacted local historical societies in Charleston, searching for records of the Stillwell Studio and any surviving client documentation. She found studio ledgers preserved in the Charleston Historical Society archives. The entry for April 1911 read, "Portrait Commission. Memorial Photograph. Client, Mrs. Catherine Harrison. Subject, Miss Eleanor Harrison, age 8, with memorial doll representing deceased infant Margaret Harrison. Note: difficult session. Child unable to maintain composure." Lisa found more. She located the Harrison family in 1910 and 1920 census records. In 1910, Harrison household, Father William, Mother Catherine, Daughter Eleanor, age 7, infant Margaret, age 3 months. In 1920, Harrison household, Father William, Mother Catherine, Daughter Eleanor, age 17. Baby Margaret was gone from family records, erased as if she'd never existed. But Lisa found something more significant. She discovered a diary, held in a private collection, that had been written by Eleanor Harrison between 1911 and 1915. The owner, a descendant of the Harrison family, had donated it to a university archive. Lisa obtained digital scans. The first entry, dated April 3, 1911, one day after baby Margaret's death, was written in a child's careful handwriting. "Baby Margaret is dead. Mama says it was God's will. But it was my fault. I know it was my fault." Lisa read through more entries, her heart breaking. Eleanor, age 8, had been left to care for her baby sister while their mother was briefly out of the house. Margaret, 13 months old, had been learning to walk. Eleanor, wanting to help, had placed Margaret on a chair, the same wooden chair visible in the photograph, so the baby could practice standing. Margaret had fallen. Not far, just from chair to floor, but she'd hit her head. By the time Catherine Harrison returned home, Margaret was unconscious. She died the next day of what the doctor called brain injury from impact, what we'd now call traumatic brain injury from a fall. Eleanor's diary documented her guilt. "I killed my sister. I put her on the chair and she fell. Mama won't say it, but I see it in her eyes. Papa won't look at me. The doll has Margaret's name on it, and I have to hold it, and I know everyone knows what I did." The photograph, taken at the mother's insistence as part of mourning protocols, had forced Eleanor to sit with the memorial doll, smile for the camera, and publicly hold the representation of the sister she believed she'd killed. "This wasn't healing," Lisa said to Dr. Moore when she shared what she'd found. "This was torture." Lisa became obsessed with Eleanor Harrison's story. She tracked the family through decades of records. Eleanor never married. She lived with her parents until their deaths, William in 1935, Catherine in 1942. Then she lived alone in the family home in Charleston until her own death in 1969 at age 66. But Lisa found something unexpected. In the 1940s and 1950s, Eleanor Harrison had become a children's advocate. She'd worked with Charleston's orphanages and children's hospitals. She'd established a foundation providing support for families who'd lost children. And in 1955, she'd published a small memoir titled The Weight of Memory. Lisa obtained a copy. The book was Eleanor's attempt to process her childhood trauma. In careful, measured prose, she described baby Margaret's death, the guilt she'd carried, and the photograph that had haunted her entire life. But the final chapter, written when Eleanor was 62, offered something unexpected. Eleanor described returning to therapy in her 50s, unusual for the era, and finally, after decades, beginning to release the guilt. "I was 8 years old," she wrote. "I was a child trying to help a baby. The fall was an accident. I have spent 50 years punishing myself for a tragedy I didn't cause, wearing that photograph like a prison sentence. But Margaret didn't die because I was evil or careless. She died because accidents happen, and because 1911 medicine couldn't save her." Eleanor wrote about the memorial doll, how she'd kept it her entire life, unable to throw it away, unable to look at it. "That doll was my mother's grief made tangible, but it became my guilt made permanent. Every time I saw it, I saw my failure. It took me 60 years to understand that the doll wasn't a punishment. It was my mother's way of keeping Margaret real, and perhaps my way of never forgetting the sister I loved." Lisa found Eleanor's will. The doll had been donated to a Charleston museum in 1969, shortly before Eleanor's death. Lisa contacted the museum. The doll was still there, in storage, porcelain face cracked with age, silk dress yellowed, but the inscription on the forehead still legible: Baby Margaret. Born March 3, 1910. Called to heaven April 2, 1911. In June 2024, Lisa organized an exhibition at the Charleston Museum titled Memorial and Memory: Victorian Grief Practices. The restored photograph of Eleanor holding baby Margaret's memorial doll became the centerpiece. But Lisa added something Eleanor had written in the final pages of her memoir. "If you're reading this and you carry guilt for a childhood accident, for something you couldn't control, for a tragedy that wasn't your fault, please hear me. I spent 60 years imprisoned by a moment that lasted seconds. Don't do the same. Accidents are not sins. Children are not responsible for tragedies. Forgive the child you were." Beneath the photograph in the exhibition, a plaque read, "Eleanor Harrison, 1903 to 1969, and baby Margaret Harrison, 1910 to 1911. Eleanor spent a lifetime carrying guilt for her sister's accidental death. This photograph, taken as part of mourning ritual, documented both loss and love. Eleanor eventually found peace. Her story reminds us that healing from childhood trauma, even decades later, is never too late. The photograph wasn't just evidence of grief. It was evidence of survival, growth, and ultimate forgiveness. That made it precious. The 1911 photograph of a girl holding a doll looked happy until restoration revealed the doll was a memorial for her dead baby sister. 8-year-old Eleanor Harrison held a custom-made porcelain doll inscribed with Baby Margaret, died April 2, 1911, age 13 months. Baby Margaret had died from a fall while Eleanor was watching her. The photograph, part of Victorian mourning rituals, documented Eleanor's grief and guilt. She carried that guilt for 60 years before finding peace through therapy and advocacy work. She died in 1969, having transformed her childhood tragedy into a lifetime helping bereaved families.